I'm Roniel.
I'm DaRon.
Oh, and man, I haven't bothered you about this in a while, but there's some good stuff this week. We got Obi-Wan Kenobi. I don't know if you even care about Star Wars. That came out today, actually. Oh man, I can't wait to really finish watching that. And then we also have Stranger Things 4. So I don't know if you like that series, but I thought it was very interesting. It took me a while to start watching it, but man, it's gonna be a blast. So hopefully, if you haven't already, you guys should go watch it today, tonight. It's a lot of seasons. I think it's 5 seasons, probably for the Stranger Things, but not 5 seasons, 5 episodes, and then 2 episodes for Obi-Wan Kenobi. But anyway, if you haven't already, go check those things out. And today we're going to finish our second part of the series that we started off from the last series, is dissecting some malware from. Is this one still from China?
Yes,
Same
this
one
one's
from
from
China.
China too. It's a different group, but this one was actually government developed. The other one was developed by security researchers for the government who handed over to the government and
So
organized crime in China.
is this one better than the code we saw the first time?
It's actually much smaller and well, we'll get into it, but the other one is a backdoor that they drop on servers. Just they whenever there's a remote code execution or malicious file upload kind of deal, they'll drop it on your servers as a backdoor. For this one, it was remote code execution mixed in with a server-side request forgery, and that's usually how they wind up dropping this one.
Okay. Was this put for like a company sites, a particular, was it targeted or just targeted for particular sites that had a vulnerability, or was it just one particular company?
Do you remember in 2021 there was a big Microsoft Exchange vulnerability that came out, and this was largely covered and eclipsed by the SolarWinds stuff, even though SolarWinds was, script kiddie. This was actually worse than what was going on. What the Chinese were doing and how they were doing it was much worse. So there were 3 remote code execution vulnerabilities that came out from Microsoft Exchange. All 3 were insecure deserialization.
Mm-hmm.
And all 3 wind up leading to server-side request forgery and things like that. So what the Chinese were doing was they were actually targeting government and contractor email servers. And that was their first wave. And this particular piece was taken from a contractor server that was compromised. The interesting part to that was I had actually warned this organization just a few days before it occurred. And I told them that they needed a patch. They hadn't been hit yet. I said, you guys need a patch. And you need to do all these other things to protect yourself. And they said, oh, we'll be okay. We'll be okay. No one's ever, everyone always says, no one ever targets us. And why would they go after us and all this other stuff? Just a couple days later, they got hit. And they got hit before it was big news and before it had really made waves. They were hit the exact day that they were trying to transition over to Office 365. And the Chinese did what the Chinese do. They entered the system, and we've discussed it before, but it's a multi-day process usually for them. So they run around the internet compromising a whole bunch of different systems simultaneously, and then it takes them a day or two before they come back around and figure out what all they had. Prior to that, they're just checking all their traps, making sure everything's still alive, right?
Mm-hmm. So they're, and maybe we discussed this before, but maybe when we were going down looking at different countries' malware, and for China, is it more about confidential data and like patented information or data so they can recreate these things, or still these things? Is that what they really normally go after?
Yes, the Chinese typically will go after. They do a lot of industrial espionage. So secrets that your company has, be they processes, procedures, recipes, formulae, anything like that, they will definitely go after. If it's something that they think is classified or might be classified or might be useful to their weapons programs, they'll go after it. This particular company is a major DoD manufacturer making very important products for the government. And what they did was they compromised all of these email servers, and then they were going back around and checking if there was any sensitive data within them. They're obviously going to look for anything that they can use to escalate and move off that server, passwords, things of that nature, but they're especially looking for corporate secrets, pricing sheets, supplier data, and then like you said, anything that's been patented, and so on and so forth.
Okay. Yeah, just wanted people to know what the Chinese normally go for. And one last thing before we get started, would you consider China to be low on the totem pole when it comes to hacking, security, all of this other good stuff?
I think our previous video definitely should make it clear to most anyone where they sit. Look, their exploits, their backdoors are horribly written, and they're very simple, ridiculously simple, but horribly written. And most of what they use, almost to a T, is publicly available exploits. So if you go through and you put up a proof of concept, they will immediately take it. That's what they did with a lot of the strut stuff back in 2017 and 18, and then again in 19 and 21. And that's what they've done almost every single time. It does happen, but it's very rare that they actually produce exploits themselves.
Okay. All right. Well, that makes a lot of sense. And I kind of wanted to give the viewers some more information about how great China is, since everybody keeps saying that China is really advanced in some of the other countries, which they're not.
No.
But on to the code.
For this campaign, China was actually pushing relatively custom created backdoors on each of these exchange servers for their initial access. Like I said, once they gain that initial access, they got that initial foothold, they typically sit for a day or two. And all they do is make sure that you haven't shut them out. And it takes them that long because they're trolling the internet, hitting hundreds of thousands of systems, if not even more than that, during the day. But they sweep back around and start checking to see what all they have and things of that nature. In this organization's case, they got lucky, because while China did go through and try to circle back to see if they could snag emails, all they got was the address book, which, I mean, isn't great, but it's better than what they were going for.
Right.
Because this is Exchange server, and because they managed to put it on the actual OWA server, they were able to push a custom DLL, which contains their malicious code. And as part of this remote code injection, and as part of their deserialization, they're actually getting the server to compile the application for them into that DLL to begin with. And we can actually see from, for example, some of the header data around when this thing was created. We can see how big it was and all that kind of stuff. We can see the revision and what they made it for if we so choose. We talked about how to dissect this previously, and I'll forego going through that all over again. You'll notice we're using .peek. We're using .peek because it's extremely good when you're talking about decompiling anything that's C# or J#, which is relatively defunct, and F#, so on and so forth. Anything that's an ASP.NET thing, it's actually much better than a lot of what you'll find, and it's freely available. This particular application, we notice it has this root namespace. This obviously is what runs first. we see it's JScript, which of course is JavaScript. Microsoft can't come out and say JavaScript because I believe JavaScript is trademarked. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But all this does is it imports all of the libraries that they need, and we can see what those libraries are real quickly. But importantly, we see it import this ASP package. We see the ASP package right in here, and we note that this is ASP.NET client support. Notice the 0 instead of an O, ASP.X. And when you query this, we'll be able to see exactly what it is they were querying and what you would have to query to actually activate this particular backdoor. They do have a second one that just points to the _ASP, which of course is this puppy right here. So we'll take a real quick look at this one first because it's very simple. What we see is this creates a new client support ASPX object. This new one is quite simply an ASP net _client _support _ASPX, which means it's what's responsible for calling this. So this puppy is the driver for the whole thing. This is the one that's responsible for loading everything that needs to be loaded, excluding the libraries, which were already loaded by the JavaScript. It is what's responsible for loading the main application, the main backdoor. And we can see real quickly, just looking at this, it just creates that VSA engine. That way it can execute really anything and everything that they want. And that's it. That's all this particular one does. It's nice and simple. All it is a driver. All it does is call to the actual backdoor. So looking at the actual backdoor, we can see here we've got this public class. It is a page. All right, so it returns obviously an application instance, so it's just booting itself up, so to speak. We don't care about any of that. The public ASP net _client _support _ASPX. This calls to that init, which starts up the listeners, and then it creates this virtual path. We can see the virtual path right here. It sits in the root. ASP net _client /support with a 0.aspx. So if you were to call that URL on a server infected with this, it would execute this malicious binary. It would execute this backdoor. And all this backdoor does is take in user input, and then, well, we'll see. It returns what it's supposed to return. The biggest, most important part to this that separates this from the prior one. So I don't know if you remember, but in the other one that we looked at, they had some very heavy database calls, right?
Yep.
And we talked a little bit about how they didn't have much error handling, but we also talked about how the heavy calls that they had in the application could really, number one, they were obvious. But the performance bottleneck that they would have on the database server and on the infected web server was immense. And it should be enough that you should at least get someone to say what in the world's going on and maybe start an investigation. To get around something like that, what the Chinese have done in this particular case is they actually made the heaviest call as part of the compilation process. When this thing was getting created, they actually had it go out and query Exchange and the domain server to figure out what the configuration of both the domain was and of the Exchange server. Now, there's some important benefits to this, right? Obviously, the first is if I get the heavy stuff out of the way, now when I try to get the system data, like as we see here, what kind of authentication are you using? And do we have integrated authentication, so that Windows authentication? Or what's the administrative name? What's the version of Exchange? So we can see, just scrolling through this, all the data that they tried to actually build into the application. This is hard coded into the DLL itself as a set string, so that they don't have to query it over and over and over again, because querying exchange for its configuration, querying the domain controllers, very expensive and very obvious, especially if you're doing it over and over and over again.
Somebody that's on the blue team would definitely pick up on that.
Right.
You're continuously querying, and then it could cause, like you said, it's expensive. It can cause a lot of loading time just to get that information. So I would have definitely picked up on that.
Right. That's exactly right. That was, I think, other than the poor error handling and the poorly written code in the last one, the big Achilles heel for the last one that we looked at. This one, they're trying to take care of that. Now, the obvious problem is if any of these configuration settings change, you, the attacker, wouldn't know, because it's not getting updated. They don't query it.
Yeah.
But, how often does this stuff change?
Not as often.
We can see SSL was required. We see that basic authentication is disabled. Windows authentication is enabled. We can see the distinguished name of the server. And so we've got the entire forest data out of this as a result. So if you wanted to know much about the domain that this thing sits on, you now have that information. We can see what path on the web server this thing sits on. And of course, the server name. And we've just got a whole slew of information to include, of course, things like the GUID and things like the admin display version, the name of the server, the internal URL if it's set, whether or not OAuth is enabled, and how, when the OBA virtual directory was changed and when it was created. And of course, when it was changed was when this malware was dropped, as one would have expected.
Yeah.
The originating server, and then whether or not the exchange system's valid. So all of this has already been built into it. And that was actually part of the malicious payload. That was part of when they pushed the attack they had inside of it, the actual objects required to pull all that information and then to pump it in here as a string. That is actually one of the most important things to take away from this, is that there are trade-offs, and in this particular case, they made a design decision, a design choice that makes their backdoor maybe a little more silent because it's not constantly querying. But it also means that if changes are made, they're unaware of those changes. If you put up a new server, they wouldn't be aware of it. If you change the forest in any way, they wouldn't be aware of it. The other thing is they're using this support with a 0, which someone may or may not notice. To me, it stuck out. I don't know about you.
Yeah. Why?
Maybe they watch too many movies and think that's how hackers are supposed to do it, They're doing leet speak.
Oh, man. Don't you hate that?
Yeah, we've trained the Chinese to talk gibberish.
I'm not going to comment on that. I'm going to leave that one alone. But yeah. Yeah.
The next thing we have, this is that process request. So remember, this is the driver. The entire point and purpose of this thing is to be a backdoor. So it has to be able to process any requests that are coming in, and then it has to be able to push data back out. So we have this call to base.process request, because why reinvent the wheel? And that's going to go off and process the actual HTTP context for us. And then we have our engine get set up and all of that, all right? So let's scroll back up just a smidgen. The absolute most important thing left over is this guy here, this method and all of its accoutrements. What this method does is we get the request, we process the request, and now we need to execute whatever is being asked of us. And you see right here, they take this parameter from the request, and then they base 64 decode it, and that is the command. And they immediately execute it, and you see this eval.jscript evaluate. So they execute whatever command that they are given on the server, and then return the output from that. And that's all this does. It is so ridiculously simple, it's not funny. You remember the last one took in a few different parameters, only two of which, one was an action, one just told them that you were authorized to use it, which was a joke because it was the name of the software, the name of the backdoor. I mean, that's like 1990s stuff. That's how bad we were in the 1990s.
So my question was, did they base 64 the data when they were getting the data back and sending it out to their C2 or whatever server they want to call it? Did they encrypt it, or was it just...
Yeah, there's no encryption on this. You remember
what?
Yeah, exactly. You remember when we looked at the stuff from organized crime, they encrypted everything. Yeah. These guys, they don't encrypt anything.
So they don't care enough, so they don't think that they would get tipped off, like definitely data, a good company that's at, or a security program or security team that's actually looking at their logs and have alerts set up, they would be able to spot things going in and out, especially commands and data. So what, especially if it's going out to a random server. So why did that just doesn't make any sense? Why wouldn't they encrypt this data? Did they not give a shit? Did they really not give a shit enough to make sure that they got the data encrypted, or at least base 64 encoded it, but something before they actually sent it over? Which now IDS, IPSs or IDS, they can decode the shit anyway. Mm-hmm. But it would have been better to encrypt that data and then send it over. It doesn't make sense.
Yeah, you're exactly right.
Pure laziness.
Yes. And that, I think, is one of the biggest things to really note. If you want to know the quick and easy way to differentiate between Chinese and Russian malware tends to use encryption in some way, shape, or form. Be it encrypting your stuff.
We're good at that.
Yeah. Or encrypting their application or its configuration, or encrypting the traffic between the client and server, or whatever it is they're using, whatever it is that they're doing. Whereas the Chinese, they don't use encryption. You are not going to see encryption in almost anything coming out of China that's malware related, be it something like this or rat like this, or be it anything else. And that's one of the keys here. And we said last time that there's nothing advanced or persistent about any of this stuff. And we continue to see that is the case here. There is nothing advanced about anything in this. They literally take in JavaScript that's base 64 encoded, base 64 decode it, and run eval on it and pump out the results. That's it.
Man, pure lazy. Mm-hmm. You can just tell the difference. And that just, I just don't know how people did not catch some of this stuff, knowing that they were running different queries, especially querying in different domain controllers and stuff like that. That should have been something that would trigger off on a Splunk, log or something, or policy that you have. So this is a good thing for Blue Team. Set up your policy, set up some alerts. You definitely should be watching. If you miss this right here, and they're not even encrypting the data and they're doing multiple queries, you guys need to step it up a little bit. You literally, since you're watching the logs all day, you literally need to get your alerts and policies set up so you can catch these type of things, especially when new things are coming out. And that also goes back to actually, and I know what you think, DaRon, but keeping up to date with all the new exploits and things that are coming out. I know there's a ton of them, but you should be ahead of the curve. That was my job, is to make sure that whatever is new coming on, I had at least some type of policy, alerts, or definition file to actually look at that when we're updating our IDS systems and stuff like that, to try to catch these things and even do some analysis and see what they're doing. So yeah, this should have been caught pretty easily with all of the shit that it was doing, and there was no encryption behind it, and it was doing queries, and there still was no encryption going back and forth. So man.
Yeah. I mean, you saw this is ridiculously small. It's ridiculously simple. It didn't trip any anti-malware, as you would think, because it was custom.
Yep.
And
tells you how bad malware,
right.
anti-malware is.
Right. Right. And it's so simple to make something like this. All it literally has to do, they don't even need to do like the other one where they've got a method to, list the files, a method to write to files, a method to... No. Forget all of that. Just run eval on it.
Yeah. And this is why I think people think it's advanced persistent threat, because it bypasses antivirus. I mean, anything you write custom is going to bypass antivirus.
Right.
Come on now.
Right.
Anything, because antivirus only looks for particular things. It's a definition file. Like, it literally searches for certain things. It cannot pinpoint everything.
Right.
So that's why it's not a good method, but it's a good layer. You should have that as a layer of protection always. No matter how bad it sucks, because it can catch certain things that you may not see or know that you're downloading, or it might be in your environment. So definitely good to have, but it's not something that you rely on.
Right. That's exactly right. It's going to catch 99% of the stuff that's out there, because most of it has already been seen by someone else. And so they've already pushed it to their dictionary, which you then pick up and use. But for the custom stuff, for the simple stuff, here's the thing that people need to know, and a lot of people don't. There isn't software out there that can actually scan for malicious code. They can scan for buggy code, but they can't scan for malicious code.
Yep. Because even with this, I mean, would the software even know that this is malicious? I mean, what would it look for? Some elite speak, or making different? Because a lot of code does similar calls, so you don't know which might be bad or not. You can say something's bad and it's not, but it's hard to do that. So you definitely need to have the next gens and somebody actually, humans, looking eye on glass and setting up policies and alerts to be able to catch this stuff. So if you don't have a team that's doing that, maybe you should dedicate a team that's actually doing that instead of putting it all on the security team. But definitely need to have a security team that's actually looking at those different things and updating those policies and alerts, so that way you can kind of catch on these things and keep up to date.
Definitely.
But I'm Roniel.
I'm DaRon.
And if you like this segment, please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel. And let us know if you like to see more of this stuff. I mean, next thing we can do is do another country, maybe Russia, maybe some malware from Russia, and then compare and contrast the difference between what you see in Russia and China. So, if you like this type of material, we can definitely do more. Just like, comment, and subscribe to the channel, and let us know, and email us, comment, maybe even bomb DaRon if you want. Don't bomb me. You send him a bunch of emails with spam. But anyway, that's our segment. Until next time.
Have fun.
Later.